Hi everybody, it's Kathryn, and it's time for your Kenney book break. And I'm kind of on a bird run here with my poems and the book we're reading. And I found this book called Owls and Other Fantasies by Mary Oliver. She's one of my favorite poets. And this poem is about one of my favorite birds. It's called the Dipper. The Dipper. Once I saw in a quick falling white veined stream among the leaved islands of the wet rocks a small bird, and I knew it from the pages of a book. It was the Dipper, and dipping he was, as well as sometimes on a rock peak starting up the clear strong pipe of his voice. At this, there being no words to transcribe, I had to bend forward, as it were, into his frame of mind, catching everything I could in the tone, cadence, sweetness, and briskness of his affirmative report. Though not by words, it was a more than satisfactory way to the bridge of understanding. This happened in Colorado more than half a century ago, more certainly than half my lifetime ago. And just as certainly he has been sleeping for decades in the leaves beside the stream, his crumble of white bones, his curl of flesh, comfortable even so. And still I hear him, and whenever I open the ponderous book of riddles, he sits with his black feet hooked to the page, his eyes cheerful, still burning with water love. And thus the world is full of leaves and feathers, and comfort and instruction. I do not even remember your name, great river, but since that hour I have lived simply, in the joy of the body as full and clear as falling water, the pleasures of the mind like a dark bird dipping in and out, tasting and singing. I don't know if you've ever seen a dipper, but they're really a delight to see, and they have this movement that where the name was derived from, where they just dip in and out of the water, and they're able to cling to the bottom of the stream bed or the riverbed and find their food on the bottom, little invertebrates. But they can just walk along the bottom of the water even on a fast flowing stream. It's really amazing to see them come in and out of the water, even in really snowy areas. So the other thing that I like about this book is it has a picture of snowy owls on the cover, and that's what our chapter is about today in Rare Encounters with Ordinary Birds by Lyanda Lynn Haupt. Chapter 2 is called An Invasion of Owls, and it has a picture of an owl, a snowy owl. When I was 7 years old, my mother cut a photograph from the local paper and read the caption with me. A snowy owl had appeared in a Seattle suburb near our home. It was pictured there, settled on someone's chimney. The large white bird filled the frame, round eyes looking directly into the camera. My mother's mind had lately settled lightly on birds. She'd purchased a field guide and showed it happily to my sister and me, saying to us matter-of-factly that all homes should have one, and didn't we think so? She started to name and know the birds that populated our large backyard. Now this owl had appeared, resonating perfectly with her newfound interest. My mom thought I should take the owl picture to school for show and tell, since the owl's appearance was quite unusual, and its countenance vivid and appealing, even to first graders and even through the lens of the Kent News Journal's weekly photographer. My offering got pasted onto our class bulletin board, earning me some kind of star. I visited the photo every school day, reaching up to pet the owl's two-dimensional head and looking into its eyes, which looked always straight at me. 25 years later, snowy owls were showing up again in Seattle, just as they had appeared at somewhat regular intervals every 6 to 8 years during the intervening quarter century. This time when they arrived, I worked at the Seattle Audubon office, where I received daily calls from excited and interested citizens reporting sightings or asking questions about the birds they'd seen. What joy to have work that considered talking on the phone about owls to be part of the job description. The periodic invasion of the Northwest by snowy owls is based on complex ecological interactions between the owl and its lemming prey base on the Arctic tundra, the snowy's native home. In simplest terms, the Arctic lemming population crashes episodically, resulting in an owl prey deficit. The paucity of lemmings drives many owls to lower latitudes seeking basic sustenance. Most of the snowy owls that settle for the winter in the Northwest will populate the tidal flats of coastal areas and riverine deltas. Early bird chronicler William Leon Dawson, pondering the Pacific Northwest eruption in the winter of 1896 and 97, postulated that the snowies were especially noticeable upon the Tacoma tide flats since they reproduced on a miniature scale the tundra of their native haunts. And though the invading owls do seem to favor such places, numbers of them also find their way into the suburbs and the city, causing a great stir among passers-by, most of whom have never seen an owl of any kind, let alone a striking and enormous golden-eyed white owl that looks from its perch atop a marble column adorning a turn-of-the-century bank building like royalty. The snowy owls that head south in search of food are the lowest on the owl totem pole, young birds, mostly males. The birds that we see during the invasion years all share characteristic immature plumage, striking white with vivid black barring. As adults, snowy owls are nearly all white. While most avian species have bare parts, typically the feet and the bill, snowy owls are entirely covered in feathers, from their nostrils to their toes, to fend off the Arctic chill. The eyes are small for an owl, but the color is unforgettable, a clear, bright gold found nowhere else in nature. Unfortunately, most of the much heralded invading owls will not reach adulthood. Young birds, inexperienced hunters, unfamiliar territory. This is a recipe for starvation, and experts suggest that the majority of the birds will succumb over the course of an eruption winter, as these years of descending owls are termed to be ornithological literature. Owl corpses, however, are mysteriously difficult to come by, and in spite of the seeming ease achieved by winter roosting snowy owls, the birds are by nature wary and certainly claim some privacy when the time to die approaches. We don't really know what happens to them all. Owls are not like other birds. I suppose one could say this about any avian tribe, but owls are particularly unlike, with layered dimensions of dissimilarity. Some of these reside in the physical objectivity of owl lives. Some we confer upon them in our human musings, preferences, and prejudices. Owls have a peculiar knowing way, a strict sense of personal space, a connoisseur's restful delight in their food, a certain repose, a remarkable capacity for necessary aggression. We don't need to anthropomorphize owls in order to feel some connection, but their silence, their nocturnal habits, their secret ways, all of this adds a layer of mystery on top of that which seems so familiar. Feathery soft eyelids on the same bird as the curved impossibly sharp talons. We cannot take our eyes off an owl. They are all we can imagine them to be. According to ornithologist Stanley Jewett in his 1953 Birds of Washington, the first incursion on record for the Pacific Northwest is from the winter of 1889 to 90. The next, the one he mentions, is 1896 to 97, followed by 1908, and then 1916, the greatest flight of all. And how was such greatness measured? The handsome plumage of the snowy owl, Jewett explains, brings numerous specimens into the shops of taxidermists. Indeed, gun-toting birdwatchers of the early 1900s were only too happy to encounter a snowy owl. As Dawson puts it, no opportunity is ever lost of killing one of these handsome midwinter visitors. In the great 1916 invasion, Fred Edwards of Tacoma had 30 owls brought to his shop for preparation. There were 40 reported by a taxidermist in Bellingham, 41 in Seattle, 100 in Spokane. One might suppose, says Dawson, from the number of specimens which adorn store windows and taxidermist shops, that the bird is much more common than it really is. Normally, one can expect that a bird killed in such numbers presupposes a level of commonality and a healthy population that continues beyond the lifeless glass eyes of a specimen. In the case of a remarkable, conspicuous, and locally unusual bird, such as a snowy owl, it is likely that nearly all of the birds that showed up in these turn-of-the-century invasions succumbed to hunters who sought a beautiful mounted trophy, or just as likely lumped any owl into the group of vermin that included wolves, coyotes, hawks, and eagles, all animals perceived to be at odds with human purposes, and therefore deserving of systematic destruction. It wasn't until the 1920s that a more ecological perspective was introduced into conservation discourse, the bellwether for this shift being a hint at more tolerant attitudes toward the vermin predators. Excuse me. Even so, our relationship with owls continues to be fraught with a complexity and prejudice that we have sorry, not overcome. Written in the 1950s, Stanley Jewett's owl commentaries contain passages in which the worth of a species is measured entirely against human preferences. Thus, the food habits of the loquacious screech owl recommend it to the protection of man, the order of preference being insects, mice, and birds. Good owls eat insects and rodents. Bad owls eat birds that we consider pretty, game birds that we prefer to kill ourselves, or domestic poultry. Today, many farmers in the West continue to shoot and poison avian predators as a matter of course. And here in the Pacific Northwest, the northern spotted owl, an unwitting symbol of ancient forest conservation, continues to be a political pariah. Their soft, small bodies are still found shot and hung, lynching style, in the national forest by self-proclaimed anti-environmentalists, many of whom have poor owl identification skills and kill any owl in their paths, including the politically innocent barred and great horned owls. For the general public of the Pacific Northwest, the snowy owl eruptions may be the single most visible and edifying bird event. The media attention that follows the snowy owl invasions is, in bird news, singular in its enthusiasm. The only other birds to achieve anywhere near the snowy celebrity are Stewart and Bell, the peregrine falcons with a permanent video camera fixed on their nests atop the Washington Mutual Tower in downtown Seattle. Most of the owl media coverage is lighthearted and visual weather art, my one-time photojournalist husband calls it. Some of the newspapers offer a series of articles that increase in depth for a week or two before dropping the topic of owls completely. The owls will, after all, be around most of the winter. The newspapers don't give our attention spans quite that much credit. Articles might cover the lemming theory, the predicted demise of the owls, quote some wildlife experts and Audubon office workers, and attempt some kind of statement on the human place in such ecological happenings. Meanwhile, amateur ornithologists set off to the far ends, keeping track of the owls, keeping watch, and setting the image in their minds to hold them through the owlless years. The tallies of birds in the snowy owl invasion years these days are kept in field notebooks that record numbers of live owls witnessed rather than in a taxidermist's ledger recording numbers of corpses deposited for preparation. In spite of the drastic ecological lapses that characterize our species, we have moved in a relatively short time from accepting the shooting of a snowy owl as a matter of course, because it is beautiful, because it is an owl, because it is there, to finding such an action unthinkable. Here is evidence. During the recent snowy owl invasion, one of the birds roosts for days in a tall Douglas fir at the edge of a local elementary school's play yard. I bring a telescope for students to observe the bird while we talk a little about owls in general, and this owl in particular. The third grade students at this inner city school, with a reputation for rowdiness, are hushed and rapt. I love the snowy owl, one boy tells me soberly. Another young student has a particularly intent gaze. I'm talking to the owl with my mind, she says. On the following Thursday, an Audubon constituent calls the office reporting a snowy owl near her home on a bluff overlooking Lake Washington. A couple of office mates, volunteers, and I pack into my little car and we all go to have a look. A man engaged in a home truck repair sees us pull the spotting scope out of the trunk and begins to scan the trees. Looking for the white owl? Up there. He points strongly to the middle of a tall corner fir until we all say that we see. Been there for hours. He and some other neighbors wander over. Our scope is suddenly very popular, and for once we birdwatchers seem useful rather than merely eccentric. Here is evidence. This greasy-headed man with an NRA sticker on his pickup window peers through my scope. A snow owl? God, gorgeous! He goes back to his repair job, but in 10 minutes comes back and asks sheepishly, "Can I look again?" "Hi, pretty snow owl," he whispers, bent over the scope. My birdwatcher friends and I exchange secret smiles. All right. I don't know if you remember when one of those years when the snowy owls were here in Seattle, and also other parts across the United States, because they come down kind of across all of the upper states, and it's really fascinating and exciting. I remember seeing them up in the Skagit area during that time. It was a few years back. I can't remember which year. But it was fun to read this with you, and I look forward to reading the next chapter. It is called The Presence of Birds, a Very New Life List. All right, talk to you soon. Take good care. Bye.